Hello everybody, today we are going to see about vested in contingent interest under Transfer of Property Act. So vested interest is given under section 19 of Transfer of Property Act, which means an interest which is created in favor of a person where time is not specified. Where time is not specified or a condition of happening of a certain event is also not specified. So the person having the vested interest will not get the possession of a property but has the expectancy to receive it upon happening of a specified certain event. So vested interest can take place in two stages. One is when the transferee is in immediate and present possession of the property, and the second one is when the transferee has acquired an interest in the property but is not in the present possession of the property, that is, the right to enjoyment is postponed to a future date. So what is section 19 in per se? So section 19 is an interest in the property which is vested unless a contrary intention, that is, a transfer of property takes place or the time of transfer is not specified. Unless these two conditions are taking place, or it specifies the transfer to take effect on either forthwith or on happening of an event. So these four conditions must be present in order to say that a vested interest is there. And the transfer must also create interest in favor of a person. So this is called as section 19 vested interest. So what are the characteristics of vested interest? Vested interest does not depend on an uncertain event. It depends on a certain event which must happen, and it creates a present or immediate right. And a death of the transferee will never lapse the vested interest that is vested within the transferee. And vested interest is a transferable right and a heritable right. It is a present fixed interest. It can be attached and sold in execution. And mere fact that the transferee did not obtain possession of the property before his death doesn't defeat a vested interest. So these are the characteristics. Now, an example for a vested interest will be like A transfers a property to B in trust of C, and B in turn directs the B to give possession to the property to C when C attains the age of 25 years. In this problem, the enjoyment of the property is postponed, but this does not prevent the interest vesting immediately. But such transfer is itself void when C attains majority. That is, when C attains majority, the his right over the property will automatically come to effect when he attains the age of majority and not till age 25. Now, what are the important aspects of vested interest? The first important aspect is interest should be vested. This is the basic meaning of the provision that lies in the name or the title of the section itself. A person should profess to transfer a particular property in order for this interest to be created. And the second is right to enjoy the property is postponed. When interest is vested in a person, he does not immediately get the possession of the property and hence he cannot enjoy that property. And the third is time of vesting. The interest is vested right after the transfer is initiated, and nothing can stop the interest from vesting the person in favor of whom the transfer is to be made. And the next one is contrary intention, where the transferor can specify a particular time as to when the interest will be vested in the person who will receive the property. And the death of a transferee before getting the property in his possession, the interest vested in him will now vest in his legal heirs, and this death of the transferee will have no effect over the vested interest. Now, when a vested interest remains vested in the transferee, so there are four conditions when the vested interest remains in the transferee: when the enjoyment of the property is postponed, when a prior interest in the property is created, and income arising from the property is accumulated till the right of enjoyment of the property, and when on the happening of a certain event, interest passes on to the other person. So in these four conditions, vested interest remains vested in the transferee. A case law for vested interest would be Sundar Bibi versus Rajendra, where the court held that A would hold the property till his death, and subsequently after his death, the property would pass to B. And the interest acquired by B in the said property is a vested interest, and B would acquire vested interest because the death of A is a condition which is a certain event and is bound to take place. So this is the case law related to vested interest. Now, what is contingent interest? Contingent in itself means terms and conditions. So, terms and conditions, section 21 of the Transfer of Property Act 1882, when the interest is created in a property in favor of a person to whom such property is transferred, Such interest is dependent on the happening of a specified uncertain event, which may or may not take place. So this condition may or may not take place, and it's an uncertain event, unlike the vested interest. So the transfer of an interest in a property is dependent on a contingent event, and the happening of a condition may or may not take place. Now, what is the explanation of this section 21? This explains that there is a transfer of property taking place, and this transfer creates an interest in favor of a person, and such transfer has to take effect on happening of an uncertain event or not happening of a specified uncertain event. So the event told here is an uncertain event. Now an example here is A agrees to transfer his house in favor of B on the condition that B should marry his daughter X. Hence, such a transfer in property in favor of B is dependent on the condition of marriage of B to A's daughter X. So B may or may not get married to X. That is a future uncertain event. If B gets married to X, then the interest in A's house gets transferred to B, and if he does not marry X, then this interest will revert back to A itself. So this is contingent event. So there is an exception for this contingent interest, that is when a person has a chance of becoming the owner of a specific property and before the uncertain event take place, such a person receives any income arising from such a property. This interest in the property is not a contingent interest, hence such an interest is an exception under section 21. The characteristics of contingent interest are, there are three characteristics. One, that is the interest in specific property transfer will be subject to a condition which is uncertain. This is number one. And number two is, if the transferee dies before acquiring the interest in the property, the contingent interest will lapse and the transferor will remain the owner of the property. This is the second one. Whereas in vested interest, it will be heritable by this legal heirs, and the contingent interest can be transferred, but it is not heritable. So this is the main characteristic of contingent interest. Now contingent interests are of two types. One is depending upon the wish of the party and the other depends upon the nature. For example, marriage of one party to the other will be the wish of the party, whereas raining on a specific day or a storm on a specific day depends wholly upon the nature. So these are the two types of contingent. Now there is a condition where contingent interest will turn into a vested interest. Contingent interest will turn into a vested interest in two conditions. One is the transfer is to take effect on happening of a specified uncertain event and that event take place, and the transfer is to take effect on not happening of a specified uncertain event and that event doesn't take place. So these two conditions are where contingent interest turns into vested interest. Now, a case law for whether act or interest is contingent or vested is Rajesh Kanta Roy versus Srimati Sunita Devi, 1957. Here the facts of the case are: 1. Ramani Kanta Roy executed a registered trust deed in respect of his property. The eldest son, Rajesh, was appointed the sole trustee to hold the properties under the trust subject to certain power and obligation. After his death, his two sons, Rajesh and Ramendra, got interest in the property. So there was a clause in the trust deed that both of them was to get interest in the property allotted to each other, happening of two events. One is discharge all the debts specified in the schedule and the death of the settlor himself, and the trust was to come to an end on the death of the settlor and the son were to get the properties allotted to them thereafter. So these are the two conditions. The issue here was whether the interest created by the trust deed was vested or contingent. So this was the issue. And the Supreme Court held that the interest taken by the two brothers under the trust deed was vested and not contingent because death of the settlor is a certain event. Now, what are the differences between vested and contingent interest? In this difference, we may be able to summarize the whole concept of vested and contingent interest. So, we'll move on. Section 19 is about vested interest and section 21 is about contingent interest. The condition under vested interest is a certain event, while in contingent it is an uncertain event. It is the fulfillment of conditions under vested does not entirely depend upon the condition, but in contingent interest it depends upon the condition imposed on the transfer. And the right of ownership in vested is created as soon as the interest is vested, but in contingent there is a mere chance to be having the ownership right. And the death of a transferee will have no effect in the vested interest, but in contingent interest the result will be in failure. And the vested interest is both transferable and inheritable, while contingent interest is only transferable but it is not inheritable. The present right of enjoyment in vested interest is immediate, right, even if when its enjoyment is postponed, but there is no present right of enjoyment in contingent interest. And this is about the total concept of vested and contingent interest. So now moving on to the next section, vested interest in favor of an unborn child. Now section 20 of the Transfer of Property Act tells about vested interest in favor of an unborn child. When a transfer of property takes place in favor of unborn child, one, the interest in such a property vests in the unborn child at the time of the child's birth, but this child will not be able to enjoy the property immediately as it is a minor. So the interest in the property is transferred immediately, and once the child reaches 18 years, it may be able to enjoy his right over property. Now transfer to contingent class. Transfer to contingent class is given under section 22 of the Act. A contingent interest in a property is transferred to a group or class of persons on the condition that persons who have attained a particular age on a specified date will acquire an interest on the property. So such interest will only be transferred in favor of the people who satisfy the required condition. Now the example for this section 22 is an interest in a property is transferred in favor of a group of 10 people. Such interest is dependent on the condition that only people who are above the age of 18 years as on the date of transfer will have vested interest in the property. Hence, all the people above suppose if only 5 members are above 18 years, then only those 5 members will get an interest in the property and others will not get an interest in the property. Now, section 23 deals about subsequent contingent interest. Subsequent contingent interest is when a transfer of an interest is in a property is dependent on the happening of an uncertain event, and the time within which such an event is to take place is not specified. So such a contingent interest fails unless such an event takes place before or at the same time as the intermediate or previous interest ceases to exist. Now an example for section 23 is a property is transferred to X for life as a gift and then to Y. If Y returns from USA, whether Y returns from USA is the contingency as it may or may not happen and no time is mentioned for his return. Hence, if Y returns from USA during X's lifetime, then Y must get the property. So this is an example for section 23. Now the last section is section 24, transfer to certain persons on condition of being alive before interest ceases to exist. This section lays down the transfer of an interest in a property to such persons who are alive at the specified time. For example, X transfers a property to Y for life and after his Y's death transfers to A, B and C equally between them, and A dies during Y's lifetime, and on Y's death the interest in the property will pass on to B and C equally. So this is what section 24 says about. Now a case law here is Kokilambal versus N. Raman, where A settled the property in favor of B, and according to this settlement both A and B were to enjoy the property during A's lifetime. B was to collect rents of the house, make necessary repairs and pay the taxes to relevant authorities, and the remaining amount was to be divided between A and B jointly. So A also relinquished the right to alienate the property, though A and B could have alienated the property jointly. So B died during the lifetime of A, and A revoked the settlement between A and B and executed a fresh settlement in favor of D. Meanwhile, B's legal heir instituted a suit claiming the right over the property on the ground that B has gained a vested interest in the property through the settlement that took place between A and B. Therefore, it has to be heredited towards the legal heirs, and also that A had created life interest in the property for herself and had no right to revoke it. So this was the issue there. And the Supreme Court held that A had retained some right in the property and there was no complete relinquishment of right. Hence, it means that no absolute ownership of B was created during her life. Thus, the rights created in favor of B were not heritable and the claims of B's heirs was dismissed. So, this is all about vested and contingent interest in respect of various conditions. Section 19 to 24 of the Act explains provisions related to vested and contingent interest, and such interests are acquired in immovable property in favor of the transferee on the transfer of such property to him. Such transfer of interest might take place immediately or on the occurrence of a specified event. So this is all about vested and contingent event. Thank you.